Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them. Hello, weirdos! Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, the podcast where we get to talk to the weird, wonderful creators behind the games we love. My name is Diogo Nogueira, and today we have a very special guest, someone that has been inspiring me since I started making games and continues to inspire me to this day. Author of awarded games such as Into the Odd, Bastionland, and who is going to release Mythic Bastionland very soon. I'm talking about Chris McDowall, author of the blog that is still going, that has influenced so many game designers, that has the same name as one of his games, Bastionland. We talked about art, we talked about what is being weird, how he sees the weird in the blank spaces, in the mystery, in the unexplained, something that's it's left blank for you to complete yourself in your mind. We talked about art, we talk about artists that influenced him. We get to see how he loves the tabletop RPG hobby, how he's so interested in what's going on that obviously make him in his work so interesting. So I hope you enjoy the chat we had. I hope you have fun with it as we did. So let's get weird with Chris McDowall. Hey Chris, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It was an honor meeting you at Gen Con. And first of all, how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm all good. It's all very busy here at the minute, but yeah, it's a good kind of busy. But yeah, and like you said, it was a pleasure to meet you at Gen Con as well. It's all a bit of a blur, but I have very fond memories of our meeting. 100%.
Yeah, was one of my favorite moments for sure. I mean, a lot of people probably know you, or like for me, you're like one of the rock stars of the indie RPG scene. But I mean, for some reason, someone might not know you, and I especially like to hear the people that I'm talking to introduce them and talk who they really are, right? Because that's our identity. So for anyone that might not know you, but I really want to know who you are from you. Like, who is Chris McDowall? What do you do? And if you can, share just a small weird detail about you, like something you like to do, or the way you do coffee, or how do you start your process of making a new game, or anything like this.
Yeah. So that's a lot. So yeah, my name is Chris McDowell. I wrote the RPGs Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland and a few other games as well. And I've been writing an RPG blog at bastionland.com for a while now. And yeah, in terms of something weird about like what I do or like how I do it.
It's gonna be like your daily life. Like, oh, I always drink coffee this way, or I always wake up. This is my morning ritual, or before I go to bed, I always have this routine, or anything particular thing that people would notice and say, oh, that's a weird habit, Chris.
I'm sure my partner could tell you like a dozen things that I do every day that are weird. I'm sure she would be keen to do that. Yeah, so I mean, just today, if I'm thinking about it, we've had problems. We've had problems in our garden. We have a squirrel that is particularly persistent at digging up our garden and eating the plants that we planted in our garden before they can grow. So I have spent a lot of time working today, but I've also spent a lot of time trying to devise revenge on this squirrel. But I don't want to. This is the thing. I don't want to like kill this squirrel. I don't want to like trap it or kill it or anything like that. So I've been trying to think of like non-lethal solutions for this squirrel. So I perhaps can use this podcast as a kind of a reaching out to the world, and if anybody knows how to deal with a grey squirrel that's particularly aggressive in our garden. But no, and I mean you've mentioned there, like I say, a lot of what I do is trying to do things that stir creativity, and it's little moments like that sound very mundane, but I'm sure that I will find a way to channel this squirrel feud into something that I can use in a game. And I think it's probably a bit unusual that I probably do draw more on kind of slightly inane, trivial things that happen to me in day-to-day life, more than necessarily, high art literary references that go into my games. So yeah, that's probably a slightly strange thing.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. As you were talking about the squirrel, how we're trying to find a known little way to do with it, I was already thinking, oh, that's exactly like you do your things in your game, like how you approach traps or how you approach situations and problems. You have something your objective, but you have some limitations, and how the players will have to do with that without relying on like rolling dice and use this power or that power. They have like to think this through, and I'm sure that will come up. I was already thinking maybe like this king has this magic creature that's like wreaking havoc in like in the castle. He wants to put it back in its cage or its habitat, but don't wants to harm it. And the players have to, I don't know, come up with a way to get it back there without destroying all these valuable things in the castle. Right?
This is it, and coming up with those, I think people get overwhelmed because it's sort of common knowledge. People will say, "Oh, when you're making combat encounters for your RPG, you should always try and think of something a bit more interesting than just like a fight to the death between two parties." And you might think, well, I don't have that many fights in my day-to-day life if I can help it. So how can I draw on this? But yeah, you've just got to think of those things that annoy you, and it's amazing how often they can tie in. Just be having a conflict with something that you can't straight up fight is already, I think, much more interesting than just how can I outfight these orcs. If it's like a goblin that you're never going to be able to catch, and you know that there's some consequences for if you kill this goblin, that to me has much more interesting implications.
Yeah, and we can draw that from our daily lives every day because everybody has conflict in their lives. Like their bosses want something, or like their partners, or like their friends, or even like they have problems with their neighbors. That's this problem they have to solve without resorting to violence because we can't and we shouldn't. But we can like look at this on the other angle and see how could that happen in a fantasy RPG, and then that can lead to really interesting gameplay. Players can still choose combat, but they will have to face the consequences, and that's all about that's everything that the game is about, right? As you put it, that's the other thing that really inspired me and really taught me was the choices have to be meaningful. They have to have information. So they have this information. They can't just kill those people, but they can choose to do that, and they will face the consequence because they know it's established in the fiction. So they can do everything they want, but they have to think careful, and that's really our life is like this, and we can draw from this so much, right?
And you mentioned about that, funnily enough, like the thing about neighbors. So I don't have any particularly terrible neighbors, but I have like various annoying things that happen involving our neighbors. That's something I've never really seen because in RPGs you don't often have, if the players have like a home base in an RPG, it feels like it's really uncommon for them to know who their neighbors are. So perhaps what I'd really like to see is like a sort of domain level play where if we're imagining like a stereotypical like D&D game, like the players have a castle or whatever, but then there's another castle just over the road.
Right? Yeah, you can extrapolate the neighbor as your neighbor kingdom or something like this, right?
Yeah, because with Electric Bastion, one of the things that part of the reason I chose to have, the two things that you get as a player character are your failed career and your colossal debt. And I'm like, this is something that people can relate to. But yeah, neighbors, I should have put that in. I should have had every character have an annoying neighbor that they have to deal with.
Or a relative that visits them
players,
from time to time. Yeah, I don't know. Like a friend or a relative that just visits them and like insist on being on their lives for some reason.
I did think I have like a giant list of RPG ideas that I'll probably never do. And occasionally they do sort of bubble to the top and they actually become something. But one of the ones I had was, it started off as just an idea. And this isn't like a completely unique idea, but it was an idea of like, well, what about a game that has that kind of OSR style problem solving style of gameplay, but is completely non-violent and kind of in a mundane setting. And I thought the way to do that, like, what's the non-violent equivalent of having to deal with monsters and traps is dealing with just like social like bullshit that you have to go through every day. So just like negotiating work, and I don't know if you can make it fun. I know there are games that have tried this, but yeah, I do feel like that's really ripe for like a problem solving game rather than being a game that's about like the story and the drama of day-to-day life, one that really goes into like problem solving of daily life, the things that you wish you could do.
Yeah, of course. Did you, does that happen a lot in your life? Did you have to do a lot of factions and stuff in like your life that's kind of inspired in your game, or no? Like they're always, I know, because
I mean,
some
it's
people like working like in companies, they have all this
yeah.
cliques and stuff, or just through gameplay that you got this focus on like faction play and then groups and interests and players navigating this.
I mean, I've seen all sides of it really, because I used to a long time ago I used to work as a teacher in schools, and that's very kind of cliquey, and you know the kids in school have their cliques, but the teachers kind of have their own little subgroups as well.
Yeah.
So that was very much like that. And then I worked for a very small company selling wine and spirits, and that was much more like you were all part of the same team. But now I actually work full time on RPGs now, so I work for myself and largely on my own. And I do miss that. I do miss, if I'm being completely honest, I miss being able to gossip about my coworkers. Because
I mean,
not in any kind of not in a
yeah,
bad way, but just like
I mean,
it's that kind of social thing, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, if you want, you still can, because there's obvious kind of factions in the even in the indie RPG space. They're like, you know,
Oh yeah, that's too high stakes for me though. It gets
yeah,
too intense.
yeah, yeah. Me too. I mean, we already. I mean, I have anxiety disorder. I have so much things, and I try to help as I can, but it can get really intense, and people get really passionate. But yeah, keep that distance. I mean,
Yeah, I like the low
let's keep
stakes
our
drama that I
faction.
used to get.
Yeah, let's keep the faction play in the game for sure. But Chris, your games have always dealt with the weird, the unexpected, things that seem mundane, but have all these written like weird gems in it. And I always like to ask people who come here, because their work fascinates me so much. But I ask them to try to, what is weird for you? How would you define weird, and are you interested in this? And why do you seek it in your work, in your life, or stuff like this?
Yeah, I always think when I was thinking about this, I was trying to think of like things that I think of as like weird that have inspired me, and I think this is going to make me sound like a really old man. I'm sorry, but I feel like it used to be a lot easier to find something that was really weird, because you would often read something or hear about something and not be able to just go on the internet and find the answer to what is this thing and find like a wiki article about it. So like, if you would see like a weird film on television and you didn't know what that film was, and you had to kind of fill the blanks yourself, or like if you were reading a book and you read a word that you didn't know what it was, you could go to the dictionary obviously, but also just trying to like fill the blanks. So it's that I always loved that feeling of not quite having all the information and having to fill in the blanks yourself. And that's something that
Yeah,
I've tried to put it in my games by just like occasionally not explaining what something is, and not in a rule sense, but like in, again, to use Electric Bastion as an example, there's a few little bits of equipment that aren't really explained. Like I think one of the characters gets something that's called like a dog gun, and I don't explain what a dog gun is, but you can probably glean that it's one of two or three things, and that's up to you to like work it out. And yeah, that kind of comes from this. I always liked it when you would sort of discover something that seemed weird, and you had no way of really finding out what it was or what it meant. Does that make sense?
yeah. I mean, I love this. That's something I kind of struggle. Sometimes I try to do those things in my game that leave something that's not completely explained. And depending on how each group interprets that, the game can be this way or that way or some other way, like some items. And I find that fascinating, because one of the things I love about RPGs is like they're incomplete games, and they are only become complete as people play it, because people get a book, read it, and it's not ready to play. They have to do something, and every group will have a different game in the end. But a lot of people have this obsession to really asking, oh, where did you exactly meant on this word on that page, and all this, have to be as the author intended. Or, I mean, I like this being unique for you. So why don't you interpret yourself? And that's something I always think about that a lot. And I love how you do exactly that, and that's really inspired me to try more of this, because I love how each one can make those things your own, right? You can interpret this in your table, and you participate in the creation of the game, right? That's something that's really fascinated me. The person that's playing your games kind of creating the game with you as they play it. So it's fantastic. I love how you define it weird exactly in the blank, in the void.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I mean, a couple of things come to. I remember a friend who I used to share a house with. We were both really into like horror films when we were like in our like early 20s, and we would always like watch horror films together. And it would often be the case that one of us would find like a trailer for like an old horror film from like the 70s or the 80s, and we would say, hey, check this out, and we'd find this really grainy, low quality trailer, and you'd see these like weird monsters or like these weird effects, and we'd say, oh, this looks really bonkers, this looks like this is going to be a great film. So like we'd then go to great lengths to find a copy of the DVD, and then the amount of times we did that, and then when we watched it and you got to see the full film, it just like sucked all the mystery and the like excitement out of this weird monster. And it's the classic thing where like when you see the monster for like half a second, the blanks that your mind fill in, your mind does a much better job of filling those blanks than the film can really ever do.
It's kind of those things that people say, never say the name of the monster, like, oh, you see this goblin, if you describe like in the shadows, oh, you see these creatures and they have like this really long nose. You start describing small details and they get closer, they see more. You never say the name. They can imagine like anything. Even like each player can have a completely different image of what those creatures are. And if you say goblin, they immediately see like World of Warcraft, green, long nose, spiked, and I think that really breaks the weird, right? When you exactly that, when you fill the blank and they can put it on plate and they can completely understand it, like the weird kind of goes away in some way, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of D&D monsters that really kind of stick in my memory as being like when I was first looking through like the monster manual and thinking which ones was really cool. The coolest ones to me were the ones that I'd not heard of. So like if I saw like I don't know, even like a dragon, like I'd seen so many like toy dragons and films with dragons and dragons in cartoons, that there's only so cool a dragon could really be. But when you get something like I don't know, let me think of a weird, like a grell or something, and it's like just a weird brain tentacle, and like there's one picture of it that's quite sketchy. Those monsters always really like stood in my imagination. I guess like stuff like the Beholder is kind of the classic one, where again it's old man hour. I'm sorry, I'm going to say something that makes it sound like an old man, but I think we've now seen Beholders in so many like different versions. It's almost like I almost wish you could go back to just having that one picture of the Beholder that was that slightly weird, perfectly round, like pencil drawing of a Beholder.
But it's kind of similar for the first time we saw our RPG dice, right? I mean, at least for me, like the first time I saw a D20, and like, what the hell is this? What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
And nowadays, like, it's commonplace. And it's one of the things I love Dungeon Crawl Classics, because they do exactly kind of do that. They bring weird new dice that what the fuck is a D7? And
I picked those up at Gen Con for the first time, actually. I brought them back, and I was just this week I was showing them to my partner because I'd unpacked them and I'd put them somewhere and forgotten. And then I found them. I've only just found them since I came back from Gen Con. And I was showing her, I was like, check it out, it's a D7. And she was just like, are you ever going to use that? And I said, well, probably not.
Well, day of the week. Like, oh, what day of the week this happens? Yeah, okay.
That's it. Yeah, sorted.
And like you find a weird short sword because it's weird. It's a D7. It's not a D6 or.
Yeah, that's true. There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to use it
Yeah,
because I use all the other
yeah,
dice in my games.
yeah.
And
So
so yeah, you know what? Next time I run one of my games that doesn't feature
yeah,
weird dice, I'm just going to throw one in there.
yeah. And the fun thing about them, since they're kind of weird, you save them like for the really weird stuff. So this sword that's a D7, it has to be, I don't know, made of bones of this interact creature. I don't know. Make it weird because the dice is
Yeah, like
weird.
it
I
should
don't know.
feel weird to hold.
Yeah,
Like part of the reason that I use D4s as like, well, D4s are the worst die in every way. But in my games, you only really roll a D4 if you're like impaired or you've been disarmed or something. So rolling a D4 feels really bad in my experience.
yeah,
So I always save it for the bad situations. So the players have to feel bad for rolling the bad die.
yeah. Uh, Chris, where would you say like most of your ideas, most of your inspiration comes from? I mean, for me, I always say like pop culture is a really big thing for me. Like my childhood was like my refuge. So that's really something I draw a lot from. And since RPGs have been drawing from pop fantasy too, but mainly it's pop culture. But what would you say is like the things you draw most of your ideas and inspiration from, or like just a holistic guy that's watching everything.
I do draw on like pop culture things and, books and films and things like that. I absolutely do. But to be honest, I draw more from not just from like other games, but from the idea of other games. So I remember like
Oh yeah.
before I ever played an RPG, like I played like Warhammer, like war games when I was growing up, and I played board games. But it took me a long time before I could find a way to play an RPG, just because I didn't really have any friends who played them. And before I played an RPG, or before I even picked up a rule book, I kind of had an idea about what it was. And when I actually played it, it turned out it was quite different. Like there were much more looking at rule books than I expected. Things were a bit slower than I expected, and all these crazy stories that you would hear about stuff that happened often didn't happen until like you had to play for weeks and weeks to get through a campaign before you got to that stuff. So like a lot of what goes into my games is like those frustrations almost, and like almost like misconceptions, like trying to make the thing that I imagined already existed. Um, so often when I'm playing a game or I'm reading through a new RPG or playing a video game, I do draw on things that I like, but the thing that really inspires me is if I find something that I don't like, or if I find something that like puts me off a game, I always try and think, well, what would my ideal version of this be? So yeah, every one of my games can kind of be pointed to. I can kind of point to something that wasn't quite right about another game and say it came from there.
Nice, very very nice. I mean, I obviously do that a lot too. I'm always reading books. I've been saying that all my games are inspired by the games and books I've been reading and playing while I was making them. And then of course your work has influenced me so much, of course. And I made 3 games based on like Mark of the Odd, and how the approach to fiction and problem solving, and even how combat is a really serious decision to make. So uh, really fitted well what I wanted to do. And I think that's a really good way to approach like uh, learning from, even like I always say that even from bad games you can learn so much, right? Because you see this solutions. Oh, maybe I would try some other way. And I confess I always try to get stuff that I really like and adapt in a different way. I always uh, I don't have the same system for example Star Wars from the Fantasy Flight games. But
Yeah,
like Primal Quest is some of the principles because of the success and failures and side consequence independently from success and failure, and I adapted that to a like different kind of role and stuff. And I think that's another way to do it too. And it's nice to see like some other game design to see, yeah, I draw from other games. Because do you think that some people like are sometimes afraid to say they draw inspiration for the games? People always say, "Oh, I look from outside of the RPG space." I think sometimes I feel they think they can't copy from other creators. I don't know.
Yeah, you definitely see people who feel like they're not allowed to do that, and they're worried they're going to get like lawyers knocking on their door if they if they like take the combat system from another game. And obviously, like for the most part, that's not going to happen as long as you aren't copying direct text from
Yeah.
the other game.
And you
But I
always
think,
adapt something, right? You always like make it
yeah,
your own some way.
and it does, annoyingly, it does sometimes happen that you get that sort of, what's the word, like parallel development,
Yeah,
where you kind of you
it
reach
does
an
happen.
idea, and then you show
Yeah.
it to someone. I remember being so happy with this system that I had. It was just a little dice. This is years and years ago now. It was just a little die system for a very simple game, and I showed it to someone, and they said, "Oh, that's how Blades in the Dark works." And at the time, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard of Blades in the Dark because I don't think it was out yet. I think it was just like the thing that John Harper was like working on and showing off in some places. And then I looked and I saw that he was using it, and I thought, "Oh, I've kind of ended up at the same place," even though that's a tiny part of what
Yeah.
makes the game what it is. But it can happen. But I think you have to just sort of embrace that. And like I say, so much of what makes a game unique is, I think very little of that is the specific dice mechanics,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Like, Hugh Blades in the Dark as an example. Like I've played that a few times. I've not run it, and I enjoyed playing it. And that game has lots of different dice mechanics. But for me, the things that make that game what it is aren't necessarily the fact that you're rolling a certain number of dice and aiming for this certain number. Like, it all adds up to it, but also so much of it is just like the fact that it's framed as like a heist game. That is more important than any one die roll in the game. The fact
Yeah.
that
And
you're
the
all sitting down at a
flashbacks,
table.
right?
Yeah,
Like the
and
flashbacks you
you all
do.
kind of sit down, and it's quite good at getting all the players on the same page, and it's very focused. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about stealing a particular thing from any one game, but I think some people do worry about that. Yeah.
I did talk to Ava Islam. She made Errant, and in the game it has really similar stuff to like Blades in the Dark, like the position and the consequence.
Yeah.
And I asked her about this, and like, oh, actually that was inspired by Chris McDowall's posts about this, like back before Blades in the Dark was being made. And I was really, yeah, that happens a lot. I've read books about creativity, and that's common, not only in art but in science. Like different people working on their field, and they discover like the same thing basically at the same time, like in different parts of the globe.
Yeah.
The
And
planet.
with RPGs, that there's a wide range of RPGs, but that there's only so much you can do with dice. Like,
Yeah.
there's only so different you can make it, and that the things that we think of as like super innovative RPGs,
Yeah.
like diceless RPGs, like we think it. Well, I certainly think of that as like, oh, this is like the cutting edge of like something that's been put.
It
But like,
has been around like for a
yeah, it's
long
been
time.
around a
Yeah.
long time. So I don't want to say everything's been done, but I think I wouldn't worry about trying to create something completely unique. I think we're at a point now with RPGs where it's more about making something good rather than making something that's like wholly original for me.
Yeah, and something that's yours, even like the mechanics, but you always infuse it with something unique. I love a book called Still Like an Artist, and one of the things they say is like the humans are incapable of making perfect copies, so you try to copy and you fail and you make something of your own, and that's something you need to focus on. And that phrase you said, like everything, not everything has been said, but there's a phrase I love is that everything that needed to be said has already been said, but since nobody was listening to it, we can say it again, right?
Yeah.
Because things recycle, like those, even like those plot points that people alter kind of the narrative, they are reminiscent from luck points from early games. Because luck points are basically this, like interfering with the game with outside of mechanic to alter the narrative some way. So that's has always been there, like the seeds of all this like shared narrative that we're all like, oh my god, that's so innovative. yeah, we're seeing this again, and then the seeds were there, like we're expanding, exploring it more. Uh, but
Mm.
yeah,
And I think those when I think back to like the RPGs, I mean, so I'm coming at it from I'm trying to stay more on top of like the whole RPG scene, but when I think of the sort of the corner that I'm in, the games that are like big things that seem to get people really excited in the last like I don't know, say the last 10 years. I think of
yeah,
Mothership being huge. I think of Morkborg being huge. And when I think about what those two have in common is I mean this with the greatest respect. I like both those games, and I've spoken. I know both the creators, but like those games don't do anything particularly special with the mechanics, in my opinion. The thing that they do is they set the tone and the mood of the game, and the way they're written is in a very particular style, and it's all that other stuff that makes the game happen that those games really shine at. Like there's bits of the Mothership system that I don't especially like, but I will sit down and play Mothership any day
yeah,
because I know what I'm doing going into that, and I feel like all the players at the table are going to be on board with it as well. It's really good at getting people
yeah,
excited and getting people in that sort of Mothership mood.
yeah. Because
So yeah,
I think
to anyone that's worrying too much about dice mechanics, I would say look at the games that have been not even
yeah,
successful from like sales point of view, but just like got people excited and
yeah,
that you see getting to the table all the time.
yeah. And I think those games really make the game playable. They're like fun to play. They have all these parts that can uh dial in, dial out, and just experiment with the scenarios. They don't take too serious, like, oh, we have to tell these stories. They make the game kind of a toy, so the group can
Yeah,
take it and do their own thing, and the games provide them with so much tools for them to keep playing, even if you don't have like tons of like this huge book of this adventure path. Like they have like small zine adventures that have so much stuff for you to do, and they're like don't have like these full pages of story, but everything is there for you to explore and create your own story as you explore those games and those settings, those locations and factions and NPCs. I think that's like the real secret to learn how to give the players not something done, but something they can play and make tell their own stories as they play on those things,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Chris, is there any kind of creator or artist that really inspires you in like a unique way? It can be from RPGs or any other kind of media.
You know what? I've been
It could
asked
be a
this before, and
writer, you know.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm really bad at this because I there's lots of people I like, but I always try. And I do have an answer for this. So I will get to my I will get to my answer, but I always the thing that I really like is when whenever I see someone who's a creator who has a very clear voice and without being like derivative or repetitive, like you kind of know what you're going to get from them, and you could almost like read a page and you could tell it's their work before you've even looked to see who wrote this book. So weirdly, someone I've never actually spoken to this person, and I don't really know much about them personally, but the person I really idolize in the RPG sort of sphere is Kevin Crawford, who did Stars Without Number, Worlds Without Number, all those games. Um, if only because he seems to be doing the thing that I hear so many creators say that they wish they could do, which is he goes away like a hermit. And I like to
hmm
imagine he literally goes to another house and he makes an RPG. And then he comes back once a year or something and says, here is the new RPG that I have made. And I'm sure he does go through playtesting, and I'm sure he takes feedback on board, and I'm sure he works with a large team of people. But it has this feeling of something that's come from one person. And to be honest, I quite like what I've read of his games, but I don't like love them. Um, but they just feel like these works of like that couldn't have come from anyone else, even though they don't do anything super unique, like in terms of mechanics or even the setting. They're often quite broad, but just like the fact that he's got this style of that he's kind of stuck to, which sounds like a very boring, faint praise to give, but I really, really respect anyone who makes. I really like people who make something that feels authentic, and this feels like he's authentically making the game that he wants and the type of game that he likes. He's not trying to do it to necessarily tap into something that's popular or to try and worrying about what other people want. So yeah, anyone that does something like that, that's something that always stands out to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like his work is always making new and it's always great stuff. So many tools, and I mean, even if you don't like the system, all the tools he creates, you can use it for so many things. Like Silent Legions, which is this kind of Lovecraft, Cthulhu mythos kind of
Yeah,
invasive
yeah.
role-playing game, and then you don't have to use the system. You can use like any other similar game like this and just use all the tools and generators comes in the game, and you have like gaming material for forever. I mean, it's really really good stuff, and I agree with you. I'm not really 100% fan of the system, which is really good. It's really function. It's a mixture like classical restore with kind of traveler kind of feelings with the skill systems. It's really work. It's really flexible. Like the words without number, he's kind of making this kind of more flexible fantasy, games, and yeah, I try to get all of those things because it's really well made, and I can learn a lot from it. But yeah, it's certainly someone that you see the game and say, oh, that's from Kevin Crawford for sure, and I hope I can find a way to invite him to talk him too, but I don't know how
No,
to
no chance. He
contact
doesn't
him.
do anything. That's
Oh
the other
yeah,
reason that
oh yeah,
he's such a hero, I think,
yeah,
of so many people. I mean, I enjoy doing these podcasts, but I think for people who find them hard work, I think they envy his yeah, like I say,
yeah,
he's like a hermit once he's gone. It's funny you should mention Traveller actually, because the other person I wanted to say was when I was at Gen Con, actually. I think it was the same day that I bumped into you. I was lucky enough to see a talk by Mark Miller, designer of Traveller, who
yeah,
is still writing stuff, and still the way he speaks about Traveller, despite the fact that Traveller must be nearly 50 years old now. I think it was 70, I think it was 77. So, the game that he designed almost 50 years ago. And he still is talking about it like he started working on it yesterday. Like he was talking about like, oh well, I've got this new idea for something I might do for Traveller. And it's like the fact that you're still having new ideas for this 50-year-old game. um, I really hope that's something that I can be doing in 50 years' time if I'm still here.
yeah. Do you think it's hard for a creator to keep in love with their game, to keep developing stuff for it? I know I've struggled with this, and like all these ideas, like as you said, I have like this huge list of game ideas that I will never get to publish, but they are there if I like want to see them. And as you said, not all of them are great, but like if you mix five not great ones, you can maybe get a pretty good one. I don't know, and develop it from there. But anyway, all these ideas, and I got lost in thought. But I
That's
mean,
right.
yeah. How do
Yeah, I mean,
you do?
no, I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say in terms of maintaining like that kind of enthusiasm
Yeah,
for a
how do you keep
particular game.
loving the same thing to develop? Because I'm trying to do that with Primal Quest, and I'm really back in love with it. But like for a while, I had all this like particular problems in my personal life, and I got drawn away from gaming in general. But now I'm back to it. I'm like watching dinosaur documentaries and fictions, and I'm creating all this kind of stuff. Uh, but I wonder how like like Mark Miller, like 50 years making stuff for Traveler and new Traveler stuff, and do you think
Yeah, I
it's
can't
it's
imagine.
it's an active work to keep loving your game, or it's something like it's natural for you?
I mean, I've been quite lucky in that when I started doing this for my job. So after Electric Bastion I came out, I was lucky enough to try and make it reach a point where I thought, well, I can try and do this as my day job now. And early on, I thought, well, the worst thing, it's not quite the worst thing in the world, but one of the worst things for me would be to sit down at the desk and need to write about something that I'm not excited about and to just kind of trudge through it, because it would be hard work, but also I think the stuff that you write when you're doing that is just not good in my experience. I've done it a few times when I've had to write something and then I finish it and I'm not really that happy with it. So I always try and have just a few projects on the go at once, and I try and like follow the muse on it. So if I'm feeling really inspired to go off into this other game, I could just go and do that for it might just be a day that I sort of am fixated on that. It might be a few months, and then I can go back to the other project. And this can be risky because you don't want to have 12 games that are 80% finished. You want to finish some of them at some point. But yeah, finding a way to balance that where you have the freedom to go and do something different. Because the thing that I found when I started working in RPGs all day was initially I found I was finding it hard to get inspired. Whereas when I was working in an office doing something different, all day when I was working in the office, I would be having ideas about RPG things when I was supposed to be concentrating on my proper job. So I would keep like sort of pulling my notepad out and writing something down and then stashing it away. So I think you need to sort of artificially create that situation sometimes where you almost need to switch your brain onto something else so that it can keep on working away at the other ideas in the background. But the other thing that I found kind of works for me is I am kind of like basically one and done with the games that I've done. Like, even though Into the Odd and Electric Bastion and Mythic Bastion and all use kind of the same system and they're the same setting, it doesn't feel like I've been writing like supplements for one game. It feels like I'm writing a new game each time because they're each taking like a different approach and they're each standalone games. I think the idea of sitting down to write like an Into the Odd supplement doesn't appeal to me at all. But the idea of sitting down to write, another Into the Odd game does appeal to me. So it's about finding what works. And for me, I like being able to start a project and then eventually say, right, that's done. And I don't need to support it necessarily in the traditional sense. But it's kind of a self-contained book that I can now put there and say that is complete.
Yeah, that makes a bit of sense to me. It's I did some of my games like this, like Sharp Swords and Solar Blades and Dark Streets. They share, I think, the same system, but they're like each different games. But I felt like I want to revisit them and like make adventures or some stuff, because I know I kind of want to play them and I don't know, make stuff for them. It's kind of hard to balance creating new stuff and doing like the old stuff. But Chris, about the creative habits and stuff, do you have any kind of ritual before start working on something, or do you have any preparations you go through before start working? I ask this because some artists have like an invocation of the muse, or they have like a small toy they always keep by their side, or like they always listen to this kind of music. Do you have any kind of like creative ritual before start working?
So I found that the two methods that work for me are kind of two opposing methods. They're like completely opposite approaches, but either one will work for me on different days. So one is sat down and I'm looking at a page and I'm not feeling anything particularly inspired. It's just to, even if I don't feel anything, just start writing stuff and think it doesn't matter if this is terrible and I'm going to delete it. So if I'm writing like 6 encounters, so for Mythic Bastion now, I'm writing lots of encounters for the system, and I'm writing lots of like 6 sets of 6 encounters basically. So I will start to write them and I'll just put in, even if I'm deliberately writing really boring stuff, and I'll just put, okay, so the first encounter is D6 orcs guarding a chest, and then enter, and then the second one is and I'll just write and things that just don't fit. So just put anything in there and then go back to that text and think, well, how can I make this into something good? Because it's much easier to, well, I find it much easier to take something that's really bad and fix it rather than try and create something completely good out of whole cloth with a blank page. So that method does work for me. But the alternative is the opposite, which is to walk away from the computer and to go and go and do some washing or some job that needs doing, or take some
dishes,
rubbish to the recycle. Yeah, just find something that's kind of a very mindless job to go and do. And it's something that needs doing later on anyway. And just start doing it. And I find almost without fail, within 5 minutes, my brain will it will like kick into gear because my brain will say, I'm bored of washing dishes. And it's like, well, if you're bored of this, start thinking of better stuff. So my brain will like start to suddenly think of better things. So yeah, it's the very direct approach or the very indirect approach sort of works for me.
Very nice. Yeah, that's very nice way to put it, and you sense how we're in that moment, and shows your strategy. That's very effective. Very nice. Hello, weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira, and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me. I just released a new game called Cosmosaurus, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a runes-light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfurniture.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat. Chris, you're working on Mythic Bastionland to release a Kickstarter, and it's another game inspired by Into the Odd and kind of in the same universe, but it's kind of a weird fantasy version of Bastionland, right? Can you tell us a little bit about it and what is your favorite weird thing about Mythic Bastionland?
Yeah, so it's kind of the whole point of it is that this is the world of the mythic past of the Bastionland setting from Into the Odd and the Electric Bastionland. So at the top of my document when I was writing this, I had the words myth, not history in big capital letters, because I kept accidentally trying to make like a sort of slipping into like realistic medieval stuff. And it was like, no, remember, this is like the mythic world. So the idea is this is almost like a history that didn't actually happen of this world. So it is inspired by like medieval actual history, but also like British myth and folklore and stuff. And yeah, you are a group of knights and you're kind of hex crawling around this realm and encountering these weird myths and sort of almost manifesting these myths into reality by exploring this realm. And yeah, I wanted it to feel like the world of like, I wanted it to feel grounded in like some kind of like it could be a real medieval place, but also like it could be something from a fairy tale or a myth, and that it doesn't have to necessarily follow the rules that you would normally associate with like a sort of medieval setting. My favorite weird thing in there is kind of just like how it all fits together, because Electric Bastionland, the setting of Electric Bastionland is, you know, the city of Bastion, and it's kind of roughly like an early 20th century kind of feel. It's the Electric Age. The weirdest thing about Mythic Bastionland, it's probably not something I'm going to actually put in the book like overtly, but it's kind of hinted at, which is that Mythic Bastionland, the stories that happen in there are probably the stories that are told in Electric Bastionland, almost like it was written by somebody inside that setting. So it's like, it feels very self-indulgent to say that, but it's almost like this is a setting, this is a fictional world within the fictional world of Electric Bastionland. But because of the way that the world works, you can walk between them if you go the right way. So yeah, I do like that kind of weird self-indulgent meta thing about it. But I wouldn't dream of like leading with that as the pitch, because I think that would terrify anybody who was thinking about picking this book up for the first time.
Yeah, but that's something for you. Like that's something you enjoyed, and I think that's something other creators and artists will really appreciate it. I think that's fascinating. I think that's the artist talking to his work and even like his public, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us will really appreciate this like this reference and then making the game inside another game. Uh,
Yeah,
that's
exactly. Yeah.
a great idea. Yeah. So, Chris, another thing I like to ask is, what is the weirdest game you have ever played? It can be even board games or RPGs, video games, or just
Uh,
playing, you know,
so
or something
interestingly,
recent that
this
really
is.
got you.
I was actually looking at my shelf earlier, and there's a book on the shelf which kind of I was really hoping was going to be a really weird thing, but it ended up not being that weird, and I'll explain why in a second. But it's a really good example of something that I've noticed. So the book is called um, it's called Top 10 Games You Can Play in Your Head by Yourself. And it was released a few years ago, and the way that it was pitched is that this was a reprint of an old book, kind of like a choose your own adventure book from like the 80s. And
Hmm.
that someone had found this book, and this is it, that it's been like reprinted for the first time in 30 years or whatever, 40 years. And it's these games that it's exactly what it sounds like from the title, games you can play in your head by yourself. And it opens up and it's talking through this thing about how you have to, it's almost like these meditation instructions of like closing your eyes and imagining this, you go through this exercise with your shadow self to try and make it so you can like create opposition for yourself in the game in your head. And to start with, I thought, well, this sounds really weird, and I don't quite believe this is real. But also, it sounds like it could be useful for like an RPG thing. Maybe there might be something cool here. And then as I read through it, and then as I went online and read about it a bit, I discovered that I hate to spoil it, but I think it sounds like it obviously has been something that has been written recently, and it's not. It's kind of almost a joke. I can't quite
Okay.
work out whether it's meant to be serious or not. But I I wish that I had just found if I had just found that book when I was, you know, 12 years old in a secondhand bookshop with no explanation and no internet,
Oh
I
yeah.
would have that would have been like the coolest thing to have found and to have no explanation for. And just it would have been a really weird game to try and play through because it's not like any other type of game really that I've encountered. So yeah, it was a slight missed opportunity, but I loved the idea of that. So now every time I go in like a secondhand bookshop, I do always hope that I'm going to find some strange book that has a completely new type of like RPG that I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, that would be cool. But did you got that and did you read it? It's more like a joke, or it's do you have like
I still
something
don't fully.
intense
It's
to?
certainly something that has been written recently, and it's obviously written to appear like it's like a book from the
Oh,
1980s
okay.
or like a children's. But I still don't know whether the author actually intends for you to play the game or whether it's just a bit of a joke. There are definitely people who seem to be taking it seriously, um, and the fact that I still remember it means that it probably is quite cool actually, and it has kind of stuck in my head. But
Yeah. Make me want to
I
look
almost
for
wish I
it,
knew more.
even if it's fake. Even if it's
Yeah,
fake, it kind of makes me want to look
it's
for it. I don't know.
you if you can pick it up and you can put yourself in the frame of maybe this is the ultimate game. Maybe you have to convince yourself that this is real to get the full
Yeah.
enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But
But
even
I mean, it
knowing
basically comes
it's
down
fake, I
to
mean, it's gonna be
yeah,
fun.
it
Yeah.
basically comes down to imagine some cool stuff. Basically, like I was hoping there was going to be some kind of game element in there that like
Yeah.
a technique. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like
But it's kind of the
I
thing
spent
you said in the beginning, like you take something that doesn't work in this game and get inspired, and maybe you make this
maybe
in a
this is
few
it, the
years,
next one.
something
Yeah.
that works. Yeah, I don't
I
know.
spent a long time.
That could be.
This is something weirdly, it's really the thing that I was looking for. This probably says a lot about me. Is I was trying to find, is there a way to randomly generate a number in your head and to have it be reliably random? Because you can just think, oh, I'm going to think 7, 2. You can just imagine rolling a die. But I'm like, is there something you can do in your head to create a random number? And I spent a very long time looking for this. It seems like the answer is no, unless you're willing to do some kind of calculations in your head to kind of generate a semi-random.
Yeah.
Obviously, nothing is fully random. So that's what I need to do. I need to find some way to generate a number in your head so you can play an RPG, a solo RPG in your head, but still keep those dice. But yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff to be
maybe
had there.
use the environment around you to generate the number. Oh, maybe see how many yellow things it's near. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the look for the number
Yeah,
on the license plate of the car next to you. And
yeah.
although probably should be concentrating on the road more than my imaginary RPG in my head when I'm driving.
I mean, if you're walking, I don't know.
Yeah, this is it.
And Chris, now I just switch more like personal questions about you, your beliefs, your experiences. And one of the first things I like to ask is about weird experiences you might have had in your life or recently, dealing with maybe states of altered perception or awareness, be it meditation or hypnosis, or even dreamings, or I don't know, psychedelics, or anything that made you see reality in a new light and change you in some way.
I'm going to sound really boring now. I find that kind of thing really difficult. So I have tried to do like some kind of like meditation and like stuff like that. But I find it very difficult to switch off my brain. It feels like it's going like a mile a minute. Not even on anything especially useful, just like inane things.
Yeah.
But the thing that I'm interested in, I did. Funnily enough, this is like when I was at university. I wrote my kind of dissertation on like noise, because I did like sound technology when I was at university. So I wrote it about like noise and the effect of the boundary between noise and music, and like and the state that it can create. And the closest I've come like having like a meditative experience is one of my favorite bands is a band called My Bloody Valentine, who make like it's called like shoegaze music. It's very kind of very noisy is the very simple way of saying it. And they do a thing in their live gigs where there's kind of a 15-minute or so segment that is just like static almost. And it kind of starts off it's in the middle of a song, and there's this sort of static noise feedback thing that starts, and it just swells and swells and swells, and it gets loud enough that you can like feel it in your bones almost. And having that kind of wash over you for like 15 minutes or so, when I knew that when I went to see them for the first time and I knew that this was going to be something they do, I was like, I'm sure I'm just going to be bored. But it definitely kind of created like a slight weird kind of like perception thing where I felt like I could have just stayed there forever in that kind of like when it reaches the absolute summit of its noise. Felt like I could have stayed there, even longer. I was kind of sad when it ended. And yeah, that's the closest I've come. But my partner has recently, she got like I think it was like she got like a voucher or something for like sensory deprivation tank thing. I don't know if you've ever done one
Nice.
of them where you kind of go in the flotation tank.
I haven't, but I heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and she said like, "Oh, do you want to go and do that?" So I'm hoping to go and try that soon, and I'm hoping that can kind of create the same kind of mood.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the other end of the spectrum where that's something very quiet. Maybe what I need is lots and lots of noise to wash it out.
Yeah. Well, you will see, right? And I was curious about this too. Uh, but you mentioned about music and these states that kind of alter, and music really can alter like the brain waves in your mind. I've have been writing and trying to work, listening to this music in this app called Brain FM that says that like increase your creative flow, or and then even there's people like scientists saying it's work or not.
Okay.
And there is really like people there's only people that enter like in trances and have like this hallucinogenic uh states through music, like through drums and or like some kind of other rhythms that can really alter the perception. And then maybe that's some of the music by My Blood Valentine, I don't know, has something that really captivates you and makes you kind of in this, I don't know, serenity space that you wanted to remain there or something. Uh,
Yeah.
that I don't know if you ever felt that with any other thing, but it's something that a lot of people are exploring now.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me it is that kind of. It's almost like I think I almost need it's the silence that's the hard part. Like, because I think my brain will just fill that gap with anxieties and thoughts and just inane things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might be something to look into.
Yeah, keeping our minds quiet. It's an like active job, right?
Yeah, he just
So,
needs to shout over it.
so Chris, about other weird things, like, do you believe in anything like ghosts? Have you ever seen a ghost or like UFOs? Any kind of like
I've
weird
definitely
creatures? Like,
I remember when I was like a child, I was quite easily scared by things like this. Like when I was a young child, and
me too.
yeah, I still remember like I would swear to like my parents now that like I can remember a very specific time of like walking into like a room in my house and seeing like a figure there and like running out screaming to tell my mum. And if I heard this today that one of my nieces or nephews had done this, I would have thought, oh, they've just seen like a shadow or something, or like you come up with like a rational explanation. But like I still can't reconcile some of those things because I feel like it was very real. But on the whole,
Yeah,
I am quite kind of a pragmatic, like realist person, I guess. But I think the thing is, even if it's not literally like, I don't think I do believe that I saw like a ghost in the sense that I saw like a dead person's spirit necessarily. But the fact that these things are so common, even if they're not like actual external manifestations, there's definitely something going on in our heads, like collectively, that
yeah,
is showing these things. It's I fully believe it's probably something incredibly mundane and like it's just something to do with the ways that our brains work, rather than being anything like magical. But like I said before, the fact that we don't have explanations for these things is what makes them magical and weird and exciting. And
yeah,
I have behind me on the shelf. I bought these recently. It was these books that were kind of designed for like children, and I remember them being around when I was growing up. And it's like the Usborne Book of Ghosts, and it's the Book of UFOs, and the Book of Monsters. And those things, like I used to love reading those things when I was a kid, even if I didn't necessarily believe they were real. There was enough mystery around them that it was like, well, you know, UFOs, it must be real. And the internet has done many wonderful things, but I think it has left a lot of us quite jaded. And now when I hear about any kind of conspiracy or UFOs or things like that, I'm just immediately like, my brain shuts it off and says, oh, this is some kind of scam that somebody is running to try and make money or to try and
yeah,
get clout or something. Whereas I do miss that innocent mystery of, you know, having this very kind of almost simplistic view of like the paranormal and like aliens, things like that.
yeah.
So yeah, sorry,
But I think
I
that's
went
what
on a complete ramble.
yeah. But I think that's what keeps us in this games. When like we still remember the mystique of this weird unknown things. I mean, I too, I'm very static. I'm an atheist, but I have memories of like ghosts interactions, and I remember
Yeah,
like
yeah,
being pulled out by my bed and stuff happening, stuff that I saw, and then like even UFOs that I can remember seeing on. Today I don't believe it, but the mystique I remember, like the awe, the wonderment. I think that's we remember, right? Do you have
yeah,
any particular encounter you remember, like mostly that's something that uh you could share, like something you saw in or just more general?
yeah. I think everybody's had those experiences of when you were like driving somewhere at night and then you see, you know, something in the sky that can't quite be explained. And I remember, but so this is how this is perhaps more about me than the encounter itself. But I remember like being out late at night, and I hadn't been drinking. I was just out. I can't remember where I was, but I was out somewhere late at night, and I saw, you know, light in the sky that I assumed was a star, and it was still, and then it sort of started moving, and then it moved away very quickly, and it was gone in a way that didn't quite look like it could be a plane or a shooting star. And it's very easy now. I can explain to myself, well, it was late, I was tired. Stars look weird when you look at them anyway, because they kind of go in and out of sight.
Yeah.
I was like, it was probably something like that. And then I remember like driving back, and I used to drive through like some woods to get back to my house. And I remember driving and thinking, oh, I feel kind of scared now, because I've seen something weird. And like, wouldn't it be terrifying now to see something stepping out of the woods, like some horrible, thing that can't be explained? And the way I remember rationalizing it to myself is, I remember thinking, well, it was going the other way. It moved away very fast. So it wouldn't make any sense for them to be in the woods now. And as soon as you start thinking about these things rationally, it was good, because it made me realize, yeah, I've probably just seen something. But it kind of kills the mystery when you start thinking about realistic concerns. And I still remember this when I used to like watch all these horror films with my friend. Again, sometimes I'd be like, I'd back to my house and like let myself in if it was late at night and I was coming into the house on my own after watching a horror film. It's terrifying, isn't it, when you go into the dark house and you turn the lights on. And
Yeah.
I just remember thinking to myself, I remember thinking, like, look, even if you are going to get scared by a ghost at some point in your house, what are the odds that it's going to happen on the same night that you just watched a film about ghosts? So I was like, that's really unlikely to happen. It's probably just going to happen on some random night. Anyway, this would be too big of a coincidence. And again, yeah, that it's the mundane just kind of kills it. So like I say, I think if you are trying to create that kind of mystique feel in something for like an RPG or a creative field, I think staying as far away from those mundane thoughts as possible is the key.
Yeah. But I mean, you mentioned anxiety. I have anxiety disorder. I take cannabis for this. But as you said, like sometimes I'm watching something scary and I'm late at night. My kid and my wife are like sleeping, and I just have this sensation that something behind me following me to the kitchen or something. And yeah, I have to rationalize it to get out of this anxious state.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's something here. There's nothing here. That can't be. But you feel it, like that's something you said. Like our minds that are so weird. Like I have this community that says, "Oh, we have everything to be happy." Like our minds can produce everything we need to be happy, but it doesn't. Like it's, oh, you have to go exercise, you have to do this to, So that's kind of a weird thing. Like we can't control. It's ours, but it's not like completely under our control. And sometimes that's great because we can explore the weird, but sometimes we have to rationalize it and tone it down, because I don't know, especially for me with anxiety, I don't know if you have these thoughts, as you mentioned, kind of identified with it, because sometimes I get this, start thinking like the lights or what's going to happen, or calm down, there's nothing happening.
Yeah.
Chris, do you have are you a religious person? Do you have any sort of spirituality or philosophy or anything that helps guide you through life in general?
I'm not religious, no. My background was my parents weren't religious either, but because I grew up in a very small town, the school that I went to it wasn't like a full-on Christian school, but it was a Church of England school. So we would have, a vicar would come in twice a week to our morning and talk to us in the morning. We would go to church for, carol services at Christmas and harvest ceremonies, and just, a few times a year we would go to the church. So it was always this thing that was kind of in the background as I was growing up. But not at home at all. That there were my parents aren't religious at all, and I think I went through the same phase that a lot of annoying people like me go through, which is the sort of angry atheist teenager, edgelord.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that I think when I was a teenager, I thought I knew absolutely everything about everything, and I thought, well, oh, why do people believe in this stuff? It's clearly not true. And I was never militant about it, but I think internally I was certainly the smug atheist. And but no, in terms of where I'm at now, I think I still am largely a skeptical person, and I think I am I am skeptical of like religions, I guess, but more than faith. I think any kind of large organization I'm always skeptical of anyway, or any sort of organization that has any kind of power over other people is always makes
Yeah.
me slightly wary. So I think, but I think I've softened very much on my approach of like thinking, well, does this stuff have value, even if you don't believe in it? And that's, I know that's not the point. That the point is meant to be that you believe in your faith and you choose one and you believe that. But I think I'm very interested in how people's relationship with religion, and I'm very interested in like how it fits in with like mythology and how these stories have stuck around. What I'm doing with Mythic Bastion now, I've done a lot of stuff reading into like pre-Christian stories of Britain, and kind of like how, especially like the King Arthur myth, like that all that myth's relationship with religion is really interesting when you look at how it fits into Christianity and how it fits into like paganism in Britain. And it's, I find it really interesting, but I am still very skeptical person. So I still find like for me, it still doesn't like tap into anything myself, but I find it very interesting to hear other people talk about and to hear about how it affects other people's lives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said like the value would be in believing, but at least for me, like I've been Catholic, I have been like Messianic, which is kind of this Japanese religion we have here, and now I am an atheist. But I think the real value of this, it's like the values that religion or the philosophy teaches, like doing good or being there for the community or being truthful. And do you have anything like nowadays, because of my anxiety, I've turned into philosophy like stoicism, and it really helped me a lot in many different ways. And 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 I was asking, like, do you have anything like taught you, because I see you as a very generous person. Like you learn about game design, and you're always talking about it and sharing what you learn with so many other creators. And I've learned so much from you. And you're not like making courses or putting this behind a paywall. What you learn, you share. What interests you, you share. And I think that's for me, that's has some values behind that. And then what I was asking uh, is there anything that guides you in this way, or like the values your parents taught you, or
I think the thing that I've struggled with over the years, which I now really hold really core, is the idea of authenticity, which I think it can mean lots of different things. But for me, when I talk about authenticity, what I mean is just trying to be an honest version of yourself. And that's something that I found very difficult when I was like a teenager and a young adult. So even just talking about RPGs, for a long, long time, I would hide the fact that I was into these, nerdy games, because I was afraid that
yeah.
people would judge me somehow. And I
Oh, yeah.
would I would hide things I was interested in, and I would kind of like, nothing like hugely harmful, but I would like go along with things that I wasn't especially into because it was like a good social thing to do. And just kind of like, just lots of little ways of like presenting like a false version of yourself. And I think what I've tried to do, especially in terms of what I write and what I talk about on the blog and what I talk about on videos and stuff, I try to be as open and authentic as possible. And yeah, authentic in just like, this is what is going on in my head, and it might not be completely polished, and some things might not like resonate with everyone, because I might be referring to something that, a reference that somebody doesn't have if they're from like a different culture or a different age group. But I would always rather try and present like an authentic version of myself rather than try and appeal to everybody. And that comes
Yeah.
down to the game designers as well. Like I would always want to try and make the game that I want to make and the writing that I want to write, rather than following someone else's like rules. Like there's things you can learn from other people, but I think making the thing that's in your voice and it's the thing that you want, because somebody else out there will have the same thoughts, and somebody else will pick up the book and say, this is what I've been waiting for this whole time, even though you thought you were making it just for yourself. And I could go down this rabbit hole, but when I started working in RPGs as well, we've discussed a bit about social media earlier on. We said that there's so much like drama and stuff going on social media, and there's so many people that will just want to like stir up engagement, and they will follow the tried and tested methods for stirring up engagement. And I don't want to do that. I only want to present an authentic version of myself. I don't want to I don't want to present a false version of myself.
And when you do that, you're not only honest, you are always kind too. And I think that's a really big distinction here, because there are other people that are being honest out there, but not being kind, and that's really changes.
That's true, actually. And that is probably where I would draw the line, because if I was being completely authentic, there are times when I read other people's games and I'll read through it and I'll think, oh God, this is terrible. I hate this. I hate this. I hate this. But I don't want to go on and do a stream reading through a game and say, oh, here's this terrible game. Here's all these things that I hate. Like, that would be authentic in that it's things that I'm thinking, but it's okay to have those thoughts. It's okay to really hate something that someone else made. But, and there's a time for voicing that, depending on where that's coming from.
I don't know. Yeah. I know. Even for me,
I think kindness is, Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, hate for me, it's a really strong word. I may not like the game, but I mean, always like trying to control this. Being kind is always useful for you too, because if you hate something, you won't see, like as you said, like you look for something that's not working to make it better. Like if you really hate this, you won't see anything. You won't see what you hate. But if you say, oh yeah, I don't like this, but I mean, I can take this and make something good. And I think that's a kind way to approach it. And I mean, obviously we can't like everything we see. There's like so many games, and every person is unique. We like different stuff. So obviously there is a lot of stuff out there that I don't like, but your approach is perfect. I can see, oh, I don't like this, but what would I do like if this setting or this thing? And I think that's really awesome. And you're being kind to the game and to yourself, and you can learn from this, and others will learn. You're doing that too, and you being such like, as I said, for me, like kind of this rock star of indie RPG, like making so much cool stuff, and you being this authentic and kind, and you approach people, and you, as you said, you read your games in live streaming. That's really great, and I want to thank you for doing that, and for being you and being kind, doing that. It's really a great lesson for everybody in the scene and game designer that's starting, and seeing that someone well established doing this. It's a great example.
But again, it's the thing is the reason that I do that, and I always appreciate it, especially when I was starting out. I would always appreciate it when someone else who like I admired gave me a bit of a shout out or did a read through of one of my games or a podcast. But I will only talk about the things that I actually am excited about. So like it's why I don't do like paid like people pay. I never like have people pay me to do like a read through or to do like to speak about something, because I only if I like it, I'll do it anyway. And like I was saying earlier about like, it's really interesting what you're saying about hate and like hating a game, because often if I read an RPG and it's like at the other end of the scale from what I want, I won't hate it. I'll just read it and I'll think, oh, this is not for me. But the ones that, when I say I hate a game, sometimes what I mean is it's almost always when I'm really excited about a game and I think, oh, this is going to be really cool. And then I read it and I like the first page and I'm like, this is great. And this is great. This is great. This is great. And then there's just like one or two things in there. And you think, oh, this could have been just what I was looking for, but it's actually slightly different than what I was looking for. And hate is a bit of an exaggeration, but I think those are definitely the ones that get the strongest reaction, the ones that are like nearly there, but they've just got something that's throwing you off.
They build up this expectation, you build this expectation, and you imagine a game, and the game isn't what you imagine. But but I mean, for a game designer like you, that's probably something that's almost there, and maybe I can do something. And when you play those games do you play those games that defy your expectations, or do you just leave them behind? Because I was going to ask him, when you play those games, do you change the rules to meet your expectations, or you just play them as they are?
I really try to avoid doing too much in the way of like house rules. If I read a game and I think it's not quite right, I do always try and play it as it is.
Oh yeah.
I will sometimes just like skip out a section. Like if there's like an advanced section for something, I'll usually just like not bother with that section. But I try to avoid like adding in rules and stuff, because mainly because I'm interested in like the design side of it. So it's interesting to see how it plays as it is. But it's funny enough, like one of the games that was like at the far end of completely the opposite of the games I make, really, is I spoke about diceless games and solo games earlier. Wander Home, I played that during the lockdown on my own. I did it on a stream actually, and playing on a stream kind of really helped because it felt like it wasn't quite solo, because I wasn't like reading the chat, but I knew that there were people there. But playing through that game, even though I don't think I would be in a hurry to go back and play it solo again, I'd be interested to try it with a group. But I think that experience still always comes back to me. And I feel like there was a lot of interesting stuff in that experience of playing a style of game that I was completely unfamiliar with, that I thought was something that I was not interested in at all. But that particular book, for some reason, just drew me in. And I played it as per the rules, and I didn't try and change anything. So I think if you're interested at all in game design, it is always interesting to try something that is completely different than what you're looking for, because I could try any number of like OSR style systems that are kind of in the same area as Into the Odd, and it's familiar ground. So I probably wouldn't get much out of it, because it's almost like just playing Into the Odd. Like a lot of these games have very similar things. But yeah, to play something completely different, like a game that I would have never written for myself, is always a fun experience, even if it's not something I want to do all the time, because it can be quite tough work.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I love doing that, and I try to explore these things too, like Fiasco, which is something completely different from the games I usually play and make, but it really inspired me. And even like the way I approach like random tables and adventure generator is really inspired about how they set up the setup of Fiasco scenarios. Chris, like the last two questions are more like kind of fun. So and what would, if you could have a superpower, what would it be, and what would be the first thing you would do with it?
Ooh, one of the things that I've realized about myself as I kind of, especially since I've started to work in game design, and especially since I've become self-employed, is I am very impatient. And which often means that if something's going to take a long time and I can't like finish it today, it can feel like I'm not even going to bother starting this project, which is not a good one for RPGs, because there's very few RPGs you can make in a day. So that comes from a kind of place of like impatience, I think, and I always want to have the thing there and now. So it's a very cliche one, but I think being able to like teleport, so I could just get to places, because traveling, I don't love traveling. So I think just being able to skip that bit and get there. But saying that, I think that would just indulge the worst parts of my brain. I think if anything, maybe I need to learn to slow down. So maybe my superpower can be like slow speed, and then I will eventually become enlightened, and my mind will learn to enjoy the journey more than the destination.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, enjoy the company through the journey too. Yeah. That's always important. Yeah, nice. That's like true opposing powers. Like maybe
that's it.
Sometimes you could have one
flip
in order,
a coin.
like wake up in the morning. Yeah, you roll a dice and see. Whoa, I have this today.
I roll my D7 to see which day I get my super speed.
Oh yeah. and Chris, if you could choose any weird thing or any fantastic fantasy thing to make it real in our world, what would it be, and why?
That's interesting.
Mm.
So again, this is interesting because part of what I've been, like I say, with Mythic Bastionland, one of the things I've been going back into as an inspiration is all these different versions of the King Arthur stories. And some people will say, oh well, that is based on a real historical figure that was in Britain in like the 5th, 6th century. Some people will say, no, that's kind of a bit unlikely, it's probably just some stories. But I like things that exist in that kind of middle ground where it's like it's not real. So I know that this isn't real like it is in the stories, but I can go to a place that exists in those stories. So I can go to like Tintagel Castle, or I can go to Glastonbury, or all these places in Britain that are like in these stories and have these connections. So this is a bit of a cheeky answer, but I feel like I wouldn't want to make some of these things any more real. I feel like I like these things that exist in that middle ground where they're not quite real. So it's not like I can just go to a museum and see, oh, this is King Arthur's helmet. This is Excalibur. It's in the British Museum in London. And like that is impressive in its own way. But like I like these things that it sucks some of the mystery and the joy out of it. So I'm gonna refuse to answer that question and say that I would have more things that exist in that middle ground where it's based in the real world, but it's not quite real enough that we can kind of prove it. There's a little bit of suspension of disbelief that's required about it.
Cool. Yeah, that's a nice question, and it ties really well with everything you've been saying here, like this fascination for the weird in the absence of an explanation and in the blanks, and it's a great definition for the weird, and I really love it how you approach it. And Chris, that's basically it. I would thank you very much for being here, and again, I would thank you very much for meeting me at Gen Con. Was one of the highlights of the con, and having to talk to you and trade some idea views and give some of my work to you. It's been an honor. It's been an honor to talk to you here. It's been a great chat. Felt like I got to know you a little bit better. And do you have any last messages you want to say to the weirdos who listen to this podcast?
I know, but I did just notice that I do still have on the that's somebody's business card. I shouldn't show that. I still have in my on my desk.
Oh, yeah.
I have 4 of the business card games that you gave me, and these are great examples of.
I have you.
Yeah, you still got them as well. Yeah. But these are really cool because I meant to put these in my wallet because I took photos of them, so I have the rules written down. But I thought these would make really good little gifts to give to some people who ordinarily would never see these games. So I think that's part of the principle of like spreading the weird around as well that I'm going to try and do, and it all goes into this being authentic thing and not hiding these weird things. So we do, with your permission, I'm hoping to give.
If you want more. If you want more,
no,
I
don't have that many friends.
For sure. I mean, leaving the bus stops or things like this. I don't know. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I should do that.
Well, that first version of Into the Odd that I did with Lost Pages, the initial print run on that. So I think you've got like the print on demand version there, but the initial print run that we did.
That's the second printing, I think.
Yeah. So on the first, before the first printing, so like there was an error with the print, and the back cover got all messed up, and I think one of the internal pages wasn't quite right. So we did another print run, but we had all of these. We had like 200 copies of like misprinted books. The inside was largely fine, but the cover was just messed up. And for a long time, what we did was Paolo at Lost Pages just like, when someone ordered a copy of the book, they would just send out 2 copies of the book. Nice. One of this thing that we called it the friendship edition, because it was pitched as like, you're going to get 2 copies of the book and give one to a friend. But what I really wanted to do, which I never did, was I wanted to go and just like hide it in libraries and in bookshops. Yeah. But looking back, I think that's probably, if I worked in a bookshop and a library, I bet people do that all the time. to try and get their books in there. So I think being more imaginative than that now. So I need to think of somewhere weird to put these books that isn't going to annoy some bookshop owner. Bus stop is a good idea.
Do you have those like public libraries, like in public space, that people leave books and take books? Like anyone can leave a book there. I'm thinking of leaving some when I publish some of my RPGs here in Brazil, because most of them are not being published here. I aim to do just leave some, like a small game with just some pencil and dice on those places, because I've seen people do that on Twitter, like making all those minimalist fantasy RPGs. They're leaving like small booklets with pencil, dice, and character sheets around town. That sounds really, really something cool to do, and that's adding a little bit of the weird, like who left this here, that's the blank. Exactly. Who left this? And RPGs can be this weird thing for someone. That's a great idea. So Chris, thank you so much for being here, and it's been an honor. So everybody out there, weirders, just keep it weird. Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.